Maya Chen stared at the city lights from her office window, 42 floors above the streets below. It was past midnight and she was still at work. Again. The cleaning crew had already made their rounds, and she was alone with nothing but the hum of her computer and a cold cup of coffee that had been sitting there for hours. At 38 years old, Maya had everything she thought she wanted. She was the founder and CEO of TechVision Solutions, a company she'd built from scratch in her tiny apartment 10 years ago. Now it was worth millions. Her face had been on the cover of Business Insider twice. Young entrepreneurs asked her for advice. She spoke at conferences around the world. But tonight, in the quiet of her empty office, she felt hollow. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her college friend Lisa. "Please tell me you're coming to the fundraiser tomorrow." "You promised," Maya sighed. She had promised weeks ago in a moment of weakness. Lisa's daughter was being honored at some charity event for the Children's Hospital. Maya had tried to get out of it 3 times already, but Lisa wasn't the type to take no for an answer. She typed back, "I'll try. Depends on how this meeting goes." Even as she sent it, she knew it was a lie. There was no meeting. There was never really a meeting. Work was just easier than everything else. Work made sense. Work had rules and goals and measurable outcomes. Work didn't ask her to feel things she wasn't ready to feel. Maya closed her laptop and grabbed her coat. The drive home took 15 minutes at this hour, and her apartment was just as quiet as her office. She lived in a luxury high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and designer furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, because it did. An interior designer had put it all together. Maya had approved everything over email. She kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window. When had she become this person? When had she stopped living and started just existing? She knew the answer. It was 5 years ago, almost to the day. That's when David had ended their engagement. They'd been together for 3 years, and Maya thought they were building a life together. She thought he understood her drive, her ambition, her need to prove herself, but one night, he'd sat her down and said the words that still echoed in her head. "I can't compete with your work, Maya. I don't think anyone can. You're married to your company and there's no room left for me." She'd tried to argue, tried to explain that she was building something important, that it wouldn't always be this intense, but he'd just shaken his head sadly and left. A week later, he'd moved out completely. Maya had cried for exactly 3 days. Then she'd dried her tears, thrown herself into work, and decided that love wasn't worth the risk. Not anymore. The decision hadn't been sudden. It had roots that went deeper than David, all the way back to her childhood. Maya was 12 when her parents divorced. She remembered every detail of that year. How her mom had cried herself to sleep every night. How her dad had moved across the country and barely called. How her mother had stopped eating, stopped working, stopped being the strong woman Maya had looked up to. Love had destroyed her mother. Maya had watched it happen. Watched her mom lose herself completely in the grief of losing someone who didn't deserve that kind of devotion. It took her mother years to recover, and even then she was never quite the same. Maya had made a promise to herself back then. She would never let anyone have that kind of power over her. She would never be that vulnerable. She would build her own life, her own success. And she wouldn't need anyone else to feel complete. And she'd kept that promise. For 26 years, she'd kept it. The next evening, Maya stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear to the fundraiser. She settled on a simple black dress and the diamond earrings she'd bought herself after closing her first major deal. As she applied her makeup, she rehearsed her exit strategy. Show up, congratulate Lisa's daughter, stay for exactly 1 hour, then plead an early morning meeting. The event was at a hotel ballroom downtown. Maya arrived fashionably late, hoping to slip in unnoticed. But Lisa spotted her immediately and came rushing over, pulling her into a tight hug. "You came. I was starting to think you'd bail on me again." "I said I'd be here," Maya replied, trying to sound warmer than she felt. The ballroom was decorated with twinkling lights and photos of children who'd been helped by the hospital. Maya felt uncomfortable immediately. All around her, families laughed and talked. Parents held their kids. Couples stood close together. She was surrounded by the kind of connection she'd spent years avoiding. She made her way to the bar and ordered a vodka tonic. At least if she had a drink in her hand, she'd look occupied. People wouldn't try to make small talk. "Just water for me, thanks," said a man's voice next to her. "I'm the designated driver tonight." Maya glanced over without much interest. The man was probably in his mid-30s, dressed in a suit that looked like he didn't wear suits often. He had kind eyes and the sort of smile that made him look like he laughed a lot. She nodded politely and turned back to wait for her drink. Dad, look what they have! A little girl came running up, tugging on the man's sleeve. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, and her right leg below the knee was a prosthetic decorated with colorful superhero stickers. That's great. Sweetheart, the man said, crouching down to her level. But remember what we talked about. Inside voice at fancy parties. Sorry, the girl said, lowering her voice to an exaggerated whisper. But they have a chocolate fountain. Maya watched this exchange with the detachment of someone observing a nature documentary. She'd never been good with children. They made her nervous with their unpredictability and their emotions that were always right on the surface. The girl suddenly turned to Maya, her eyes going wide. I love your shoes. They're so sparkly. Maya looked down at her heels, then back at the child. Thank you. Sophie, don't bother the nice lady, the man said, standing up. Sorry about that. She gets excited. It's fine, Maya said, though her tone suggested it wasn't entirely fine. I'm James, by the way. James Morrison. And this is my daughter, Sophie. Maya shook his hand briefly. Maya Chen. Wait, Maya Chen from Tech Vision? I've read about you. You're doing incredible work in software development. She was used to this reaction and had a standard response ready. Thank you. It's been a good run. Sophie tugged on her dad's sleeve again. Can I go see the chocolate fountain now? May I? James corrected gently. And yes, but just look. We'll get some after dinner. Sophie ran off, and James watched her go with an expression that Maya couldn't quite identify. It was love, clearly, but it was more than that. It was pride and protectiveness and something else she couldn't name. She's a great kid, James said, more to himself than to Maya. Toughest person I know, honestly. Maya didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She sipped her drink and hoped he'd take the hint and move along, but James didn't seem to notice her discomfort. Are you here for the fundraiser? Do you have a connection to the hospital? A friend's daughter is being honored, Maya said. I'm just here to support her. That's nice of you. These events are important. The hospital does amazing work. Sophie's had several surgeries there over the years. Maya nodded, feeling increasingly awkward. She wasn't good at this. The personal conversation, the sharing of stories. Give her a boardroom negotiation any day over small talk about families and feelings. Well, I should probably go find my table, she said, looking for an escape. Of course. Nice meeting you. Maya walked away quickly, weaving through the crowd until she found Lisa's table. She spent the next hour going through the motions, smiling at the right times, clapping when everyone else clapped. But her eyes kept drifting back to that man and his daughter. She watched how James interacted with Sophie throughout the evening. How he leaned down to hear her whisper something. How he laughed at whatever joke she told. How he cut her food without her having to ask. How he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And something about it bothered Maya. Not bothered in a bad way exactly. More like it bothered her the way a forgotten word bothers you. Dancing just out of reach. It stirred something uncomfortable in her chest. Something she'd worked hard to bury. As the program began and various people spoke about the hospital's work, Maya found herself thinking about her own father. He'd never looked at her the way James looked at Sophie. Even before the divorce, he'd been distant, always working, always somewhere else. After he left, she saw him maybe twice a year. Awkward dinners where neither of them knew what to say. She'd told herself it didn't matter. That she didn't need that kind of relationship. That she was fine on her own. But watching James with Sophie, she wondered if she'd been lying to herself all along. Maya was trying to figure out how to make her exit when James appeared at her table again. Sophie was with him, bouncing on her toes with barely contained energy. Excuse me, Ms. Chen, James said with an apologetic smile. Sophie has something she wants to ask you. The little girl looked up at Maya with bright, curious eyes. My dad says you make computer stuff. Do you make games? Maya felt herself tense. She never knew how to talk to children. Their questions were so direct, so honest. Not games exactly. I make software that helps businesses run better. Oh. Sophie looked disappointed for about half a second before brightening again. That's okay. My dad teaches kids at school. He says everyone has different superpowers and yours is making computer things work. Despite herself, Maya felt her lips twitch into an almost smile. I suppose that's one way to put it. James cleared his throat. Actually, I wanted to ask you something. If you have a minute? Maya glanced at her watch. She'd already stayed longer than planned. But something made her say, "Sure. I'm working on a project at the school where I teach. We're trying to develop an adaptive technology program for students with disabilities. Better software, specialized equipment, that kind of thing. But we need funding and, honestly, expertise. I know this is probably not the time or place, but would you be interested in hearing more about it?" This, Maya understood. This was business. This was something she could do without feeling exposed or uncomfortable. What age group? Middle school. Ages 11 to 14. We have several students who could really benefit from better technology. Right now we're working with outdated equipment and software that wasn't designed with accessibility in mind. Maya found herself genuinely interested despite her intention to leave. That's a significant gap in the market. Most educational technology companies focus on either early childhood or college level. Exactly. And for kids like Sophie, who'll be entering that age range in a few years, having the right tools could make a huge difference in their education. Sophie had wandered off to talk to another child, and Maya watched her go. The girl moved with confidence, her prosthetic leg not slowing her down at all. She seems like she's doing well. James followed her gaze, and that look crossed his face again. Pure love, uncomplicated and fierce. She's amazing. Honestly, she's taught me more about life than I've taught her. When she was born, the doctors told us about her limb difference, and I won't lie, I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. But Sophie? She's never seen it as something wrong with her. It's just part of who she is. Maya felt something twist in her chest. This man spoke about his daughter with such openness, such vulnerability. It was completely foreign to her. What about her mother? The question came out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. Too personal. Too intrusive, but James didn't seem offended. His expression grew sad but not bitter. She left when Sophie was 2. The medical appointments, the surgeries, the uncertainty. It was too much for her. She sends a card on birthdays, but that's about it. I'm sorry. Don't be. We're doing fine. Better than fine, actually. It's just the 2 of us, and that works for us. He smiled, shaking off the sadness. Anyway, about that project. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? I can show you what we're working on. No pressure, just a conversation. Maya should have said no. She should have given him her assistant's email and let it become another item on her business calendar that she'd eventually cancel. But instead, she heard herself say, "Okay, coffee." They exchanged numbers, and James headed back to Sophie. Maya left shortly after, telling herself the whole drive home that this was purely professional interest. She was always looking for good corporate social responsibility projects. This was just business. So why did her heart beat a little faster when her phone buzzed 2 days later with a message from James? They met at a small coffee shop near his school the following week. Maya arrived exactly on time, wearing her usual armor of a business suit and professional demeanor. James was already there, wearing jeans and a sweater with papers spread across the table. "Thanks for coming," he said, standing to shake her hand. "I wasn't sure if you'd really show up. Successful people like you must get pitched ideas constantly. I said I would be here." Maya sat down and got straight to business. "Tell me about the program." For the next hour, James walked her through his vision. He showed her data on how students with disabilities often fell behind, not because they couldn't learn, but because the tools available to them were inadequate. He explained the specific technologies he wanted to implement and how they could be scaled to other schools. Maya found herself impressed. This wasn't some vague feel-good idea. James had done his homework. He had statistics, case studies, a clear implementation plan. He just lacked the funding and the technical expertise to make it happen. "This is solid work," she said, reviewing his proposal on her tablet. "You've clearly thought this through." James leaned back in his chair, looking relieved. "I've been working on it for 2 years. Ever since Sophie started having trouble with the standard computer setup in her kindergarten class. I thought, if she's struggling and she's one of the lucky ones with parents who can advocate for her, what about kids who don't have that?" There it was again. That openness about his daughter, that willingness to let his love for her be visible, Maya felt simultaneously drawn to it and terrified by it. "I could help," she said carefully. "My company could sponsor the initial rollout. We'd need to draw up a formal agreement, establish metrics for success, that sort of thing. Really? James's face lit up. That would be incredible. These kids, you have no idea what a difference this could make. They spent another 30 minutes discussing logistics, and Maya was surprised to find she wasn't watching the clock. Usually, she timed meetings down to the minute, always aware of how she could be using her time more efficiently. But talking with James was different. He was passionate but not pushy, knowledgeable but not arrogant. As they were packing up to leave, James said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Maya stiffened immediately. "That depends on the question. Why did you really agree to this meeting? I mean, I'm grateful you did, but you could have just written a check and been done with it. Why take the time?" Maya considered lying. She was good at that, deflecting, keeping people at a distance. But something about James's direct gaze made her tell the truth. Or at least part of it. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because you actually care. A lot of people talk about making a difference, but they don't really mean it." "You do," James smiled. "Well, thank you for taking a chance. Same time next week, we can start planning the implementation." Maya agreed, and that became their pattern. Every week they met for coffee. Officially, they were discussing the technology project, but their conversations began to drift. James would tell her about his students, about the funny things Sophie said about his philosophy of teaching. Maya found herself sharing things too, about the challenges of running a company, about the pressure of always having to be the smartest person in the room. After their fourth meeting, James said, "You know, we keep meeting at coffee shops. Why don't you come by the school sometime? See the space where we'll be implementing this program?" "I don't think that's necessary. Sophie's been asking about you." That stopped Maya. Why would she ask about me? "Because I mentioned I was meeting with you. She remembered you from the fundraiser, the lady with the sparkly shoes. She wants to know if you make robot legs because apparently that would be cool." Despite herself, Maya laughed. Actually laughed. When was the last time she'd done that? "I don't make robot legs. Come tell her that yourself. Plus, I think it would help to see the current setup. Understand what we're working with." So Maya found herself walking through the halls of Jefferson Middle School the following Tuesday afternoon. The building was old but well-maintained, with student artwork covering the walls and the buzz of young voices echoing through the corridors. James's classroom was at the end of the hall. He taught science, and his room reflected that. Posters of the solar system, a skeleton in the corner, beakers and microscopes on shelves. A group of students were there for after-school tutoring, and they all looked up with curiosity when Maya walked in. "Everyone, this is Ms. Chen," James announced. "She's the CEO I told you about who's going to help us with the new technology program." The students peppered her with questions. What was it like running a company? Did she know how to code? Had she invented anything cool? Maya, who normally kept children at arm's length, found herself answering honestly. These kids were smart and curious, and they didn't treat her like some untouchable business figure. They were just kids who wanted to learn. After the students left, James showed her the current computer lab. It was worse than she'd imagined. Outdated machines, poor accessibility features, software from a decade ago. "This is what we're working with," James said. "Half of these don't even turn on reliably." Maya was already making mental notes. This wasn't just a charitable project anymore. This was a problem that needed solving, and she was good at solving problems. "Dad." Sophie burst into the room, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. "Sorry I'm late. My art class ran over and oh, you're the sparkly shoe lady." "Hi, Sophie," Maya said, feeling awkward again. "Your dad tells me you think I make robot legs." Sophie giggled. "That would be so cool, though. Can you imagine? Robot legs that could jump super high or run really fast. Unfortunately, I work with software, not hardware. But there are companies that make very advanced prosthetics now. Maybe you'll work for one someday. Maybe I'll start my own company like you did." The statement was so matter-of-fact, so confident, that Maya felt a pang of something she couldn't identify. When she was Sophie's age, she'd been withdrawn, angry at her. Parents building walls around herself. This little girl had been through surgeries and challenges Maya couldn't imagine, yet here she was, full of life and possibility. "You know what?" Maya heard herself saying. "If you do, I'll invest in it." Sophie beamed at her, and James looked surprised but pleased. As they walked to the parking lot later, after Sophie had run ahead to the car, James said, "Thank you for coming today, for talking to the kids. You didn't have to do that. They're smart kids. They deserve better resources. They do. But that's not what I meant. Sophie, she doesn't usually take to people this quickly. But she likes you. Maya didn't know what to say to that. She got into her car and drove back to her office, but for once she didn't go back to work. Instead, she went home, poured herself a glass of wine, and stood at her window looking out at the city. Something was changing. She could feel it. The walls she'd built so carefully were developing cracks, and a single father with kind eyes and his brave daughter were slipping through them. The scary part? Maya wasn't sure she wanted to stop them anymore. The technology project moved forward quickly once Maya committed to it. She assigned 2 of her best engineers to work with James on developing the adaptive software. The initial budget she'd approved was generous, but every time she reviewed the progress reports, she found herself increasing it. Better equipment. More comprehensive training. Additional accessibility features. Her CFO questioned the spending. "This is a lot of money for one middle school program," he said during their monthly budget meeting. "What's the ROI?" Maya had looked at him coldly. Not everything is about return on investment. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing. Later, alone in her office, she'd wondered when she'd started thinking that way. The old Maya would have agreed with her. CFO. The old Maya would have capped the budget and moved on to more profitable ventures. But the old Maya hadn't. Met James and Sophie, their weekly coffee. Meetings had become something Maya actually looked forward to. She stopped scheduling them around other appointments and started blocking out the time as sacred. James would update her on the project, but they'd also talk about other things. Books they were reading, places they'd traveled. Their completely different views on work-life balance. "You work too much," James said one afternoon, after Maya mentioned she'd been at the office until 3 in the morning. Says the man who teaches all day, tutors after school, and goes home to parent a 7-year-old. "That's different. I'm not working, I'm living. There's a balance." Easy to say when you're not running a multi-million-dollar company. True. But I'm also not missing my life while it happens around me. The comment stung because Maya knew he was right. She'd been missing her life for years now. She'd stopped seeing friends, stopped pursuing hobbies, stopped doing anything that wasn't directly related to work. When had that happened? When had she shrunk her world down to just spreadsheets and strategy meetings? "Sorry," James said, noticing her expression. "I didn't mean to preach. You've built something incredible, and that takes sacrifice. I just worry that you're sacrificing yourself. You don't even know me, don't I?" And the thing was, he did. Somehow, in these few weeks of conversation, James had seen through her carefully constructed professional persona. He saw the loneliness she tried to hide, the fear that kept her working late, rather than going home to an empty apartment, the belief she held deep down that if she stopped achieving, she'd stop being worth anything. Maya stood abruptly. "I should get back to the office. Maya, I'll see you next week." She left without looking back, angry at him for seeing too much and angry at herself for letting him. But that night, lying in bed unable to sleep, Maya thought about what James had said, about missing her life, about balance, about the difference between working and living. She thought about Sophie, who'd been through more medical challenges at 7 than Maya had faced in her entire life, yet still laughed and dreamed and believed in robot legs. When had Maya stopped dreaming? She didn't go to their next coffee meeting. She sent a text saying something had come up at work. It was a lie, and she suspected James knew it, but he didn't push. He just replied, "No problem. Hope everything's okay." But then Sophie sent her a drawing through James's phone. It was a picture of 3 stick figures labeled me, Dad, and Ms. Maya. They were standing in front of a school with happy faces and a big sun overhead. Maya stared at that drawing for a long time. When had she become part of Sophie's world? When had this stopped being just a business arrangement? She called James that evening. "I'm sorry I canceled. I wasn't busy. I needed space, I know. I pushed too hard. I do that sometimes. Ask my students, they call me Mr. M the Meddler." Maya surprised herself by laughing. "That's terrible, I know. But hey, if you're up for it, Sophie has a school play on Friday. Nothing fancy, just a class performance. But she asked if you'd come. You can say no. I'll understand." Maya knew she should say no. She should pull back, reestablish boundaries. Remember that this was supposed to be about funding a technology program, not about getting involved in people's lives. "What time?" she asked instead. The school auditorium was packed with parents on Friday evening. Maya sat in the back, feeling out of place among the families. She'd dressed down for once, jeans and a sweater, instead of her usual suit, but she still felt like an outsider, looking in at a world she didn't belong to. The play was a student-written production about environmental conservation. Sophie played a tree who gave a speech about the importance of forests. She was nervous at first, Maya could tell, but then she spotted her dad in the audience. James gave her 2 thumbs up and Sophie's whole face brightened. She delivered her lines with confidence, and when she took her bow, James stood and cheered like she'd just won an Oscar. After the performance, Sophie ran to them in the hallway, still wearing her tree costume made of brown paper and green tissue paper. "Did you see me? Did you see my part?" "You were wonderful," James said, scooping her into a hug. "Best tree I've ever seen. Ms. Maya, did you like it?" Maya found herself crouching down to Sophie's level, something she'd never done with a child before. "You were fantastic. I believed you were really a tree." Sophie giggled. "I practiced so much. Dad helped me with my lines every night." "Of course he did," Maya said, glancing up at James. He was looking at his daughter with that expression again, that pure, uncomplicated love that made Maya's chest ache. "Can Ms. Maya come to dinner with us?" Sophie asked. "We always go to Tony's Pizza after my school stuff." "Sophie, Ms. Chen is probably busy." "I'm not," Maya interrupted. "I'd like to come, if that's okay." James looked surprised but pleased. "Yeah, of course. That would be great." Tony's Pizza was a small family restaurant near the school, the kind of place with red checkered tablecloths and pictures of Italy on the walls. Sophie immediately ordered her usual cheese pizza with extra cheese and launched into a detailed recap of every moment of the play, including the parts where other kids forgot their lines. Maya found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. There was no pressure here. No need to be impressive or professional, just a simple dinner with good company. "So what did you want to be when you were my age?" Sophie asked Maya between bites of pizza. "I wanted to be an architect. I liked the idea of designing buildings that would last forever." "Why didn't you?" "I got interested in computers instead." "Same principle, really. Building things that last. My dad says you built your company from nothing." "That's cool." Maya glanced at James, who shrugged. It came up. "I tell my students about successful people who started with big dreams." "What's your biggest dream?" Sophie asked Maya. It was such a simple question, but Maya realized she didn't have an answer. She'd achieved her professional dreams, built the company, made her fortune, proved she didn't need anyone. But what now? What was she working toward? "I'm still figuring that out," she said honestly. Sophie considered this seriously. "My biggest dream is to be a scientist who invents things that help people. Like my dad helps people by teaching them. Everyone should help people, I think. That's a good dream." After dinner, James walked Maya to her car while Sophie played on the restaurant's small patio under the lights. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said. It meant a lot to Sophie, to both of us. "I'm glad I came." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Sophie chase fireflies. Then James said quietly, "Can I tell you something? And please don't take this the wrong way." Maya tensed. "What?" "When I first saw you at the fundraiser, I thought you were the saddest person I'd ever seen. You had everything, success, money, respect, but you looked so alone." Maya felt her defenses rising. "That's presumptuous. And wait, let me finish. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying I recognize it because I've been there. After Sophie's mom left, I was drowning. I was so angry and hurt and scared. I pushed everyone away because it felt safer than letting people in and risking that pain again." "What changed?" "Sophie. I realized I was teaching her to be afraid instead of brave. That if I kept hiding from connection, she'd learn to do the same. So I made a choice to show up, to let people care about me even though it was terrifying." Maya's throat felt tight. "And if they hurt you again?" "Then they hurt me." "But Maya, the alternative is worse. Being safe but alone. That's not living. That's just existing." She couldn't respond. The words she'd been holding back for years were too close to the surface, threatening to spill out. All the fear and loneliness and longing she'd buried under layers of achievement and professional success. James seemed to understand. He didn't push. He just said, "Think about it. And whatever you decide, we're still friends. That doesn't change." That night, Maya sat in her apartment and really looked at her life for the first time in years. The expensive furniture that didn't feel like home. The awards on the wall that didn't make her proud anymore. The calendar full of meetings but empty of meaning. She thought about her mother, destroyed by love. But she also thought about James, strengthened by it, made whole by his love for Sophie. She thought about how he'd lost his partner but hadn't lost himself. How he'd chosen to stay open instead of closing down. Maybe her mother's story didn't have to be hers. Maybe love didn't have to be destructive. Maybe the right love, the real kind, could make you braver instead of smaller. But admitting that meant admitting she'd been wrong for years. It meant tearing down walls she'd spent decades building. It meant being vulnerable in ways that terrified her. Maya pulled out her phone and looked at the picture Sophie had drawn. 3 stick figures with happy faces. Somewhere along the way, without her permission or planning, she'd become part of something. Part of a story that wasn't just about her anymore. And the scariest part, she didn't want to walk away from it. Over the next few weeks, Maya found herself spending more time with James and Sophie. It wasn't planned. It just happened. A text from James asking if she wanted to grab lunch turned into a Saturday afternoon at the park with Sophie. An invitation to help test the new adaptive technology at school turned into staying for the science fair and cheering when Sophie's volcano project won 3rd place. Maya's assistant noticed the change. "You've been leaving the office at reasonable hours lately. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine. I'm just trying something new." "It's about time," her assistant said with a knowing smile. But even as Maya let herself get closer to James and Sophie, part of her was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when she'd prove her mother right. When love would ask too much and she'd have to choose between her heart and her safety. That moment felt inevitable, and it was coming sooner than she thought. It started so simply. James texted Maya on a Tuesday morning. "Sophie has a daddy-daughter dance at school on Friday. Big deal, apparently. She wants to know if you'd help her pick out a dress this weekend." Maya stared at the message for a long time, shopping for a dress. With a 7-year-old. This was crossing a line, moving from friendly involvement to something that looked a lot like family. Every instinct told her to make an excuse. To pull back before she got in too deep, she typed, "I'd love to." The response was immediate. A smiley face from Sophie, who'd clearly been watching over her dad's shoulder. But that afternoon, everything changed. Maya was in a board meeting when her phone buzzed with an emergency alert. One of their biggest clients, a company that accounted for nearly 30% of their annual revenue, was threatening to leave. They'd been approached by a competitor with a better offer, and they wanted Maya to match it by the end of the week or they'd walk. Her board members looked at her expectantly. This was the kind of crisis that defined a CEO, the kind of moment where she'd always thrived before. High stakes, clear objective, everything on the line. "Set up a meeting," Maya said calmly. "I'll handle it." She spent the rest of the week in emergency mode. Late nights reviewing contracts. Early mornings pitching revised proposals. Conference calls that stretched for hours. She lived on coffee and adrenaline, barely sleeping. Her whole focus narrowed to this one problem. She forgot about the dress shopping. Forgot until Saturday morning when her phone rang and Sophie's disappointed voice said, "Ms. Maya, are we still going to the store? Dad says you're probably too busy, but I hoped." Maya's heart sank. "Sophie, I'm so sorry. I have a work emergency and It's okay." The little girl's voice was trying so hard to sound understanding, which somehow made it worse. "I know you have important stuff to do. Let me talk to your dad." James came on the line. "Don't worry about it. We understand. I'm really sorry. This client crisis came up and, Maya, you don't have to explain. You run a company. Things come up." But there was something in his voice, not anger exactly, just a kind of resignation that made Maya feel worse than if he'd yelled at her. After they hung up, Maya stood in her office and looked at the view she'd once loved. The city stretched out below her, all those buildings and businesses and busy people. From up here it all looked so small, so meaningless. She thought about Sophie trying to sound understanding, about how the little girl had asked specifically for her help, about how this was important to her in a way that Maya's contract negotiations couldn't match. But the meeting with the client was in an hour. If she left now, she'd risk losing 30% of her company's revenue. She'd risk everything she'd built. That's what she told herself as she straightened her suit and headed to the conference room. The meeting was brutal. 5 hours of back-and-forth negotiation. The client wanted concessions Maya didn't want to give. She pushed back. It was the kind of high-level business warfare she used to live for. But today she kept thinking about a 7-year-old girl who'd wanted help picking out a dress. In the end, Maya saved the account. She gave up more than she wanted to, but the client stayed. Her team congratulated her. Her board members sent approving emails. She'd done it again. Pulled off the impossible, proved why she was the CEO. So why did she feel like she'd lost something important? That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Sophie's face, hearing that brave little voice saying, "It's okay," when it clearly wasn't. She thought about all the times her own father had chosen work over her. All the school plays he'd missed, the birthdays he'd forgotten, the promises he'd broken. She remembered how it felt to learn that you weren't as important as a meeting or a deal or a deadline, and she'd just done the same thing to Sophie. At 2 a.m, Maya did something she never did. She called James. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Maya, are you okay?" "No, I'm not. I'm sitting in my apartment and I just saved a major account, and everyone's telling me what a great job I did, but all I can think about is that I let Sophie down." There was a long pause. Then James said gently, "You had a work emergency. Sophie understands that. She shouldn't have to understand that. She's 7 years old and she asked me for one thing and I chose a contract negotiation over her. What do you want me to say, Maya?" "I don't know. Her voice cracked. "I watched my father do this. Choose work over me again and again. I swore I'd never be like him. But here I am doing exactly the same thing. You're not your father. How do you know that?" "Because your father wouldn't be calling me at 2 a.m, upset that he'd disappointed a kid who isn't even his. Your father wouldn't care enough to feel guilty." Maya felt tears on her face and realized she was crying. When was the last time she'd cried? Not since David left. Maybe not since she was 12 and her parents' marriage fell apart. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to let people in. I don't know how to balance work and life. I don't know how to be the kind of person Sophie deserves to have in her life." "None of us know how," James said quietly. "We just figure it out as we go. And we mess up sometimes. That's okay. What matters is showing up afterward." "The dance is Friday, right?" "Yeah. Would Sophie still want me to come? Not as a chaperone or anything. Just to watch?" "I think she'd love that. But Maya, you don't have to. If this is too much, if we're asking too much of you, you're not." "I am. I'm asking too much of myself. Expecting to keep everyone at a distance while also somehow being part of your lives. It doesn't work that way, does it?" "No, it doesn't." They talked for another hour. James told her about how scared he'd been when Sophie was born. How he'd almost run away from the responsibility. About how Sophie's mother leaving had been the worst and best thing that happened to him. Worst because of the abandonment. Best because it forced him to show up fully as a parent. "Being a parent taught me that love isn't something you protect yourself from," James said. "It's something you jump into even knowing you might get hurt. Especially knowing that, because the alternative, being safe but alone, that's not living." Maya thought about her apartment. Her empty calendar outside of work. Her life that looked so successful on paper but felt so hollow in reality. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of being like my mother. Of loving someone so much that I lose myself." "Maya, your mother didn't lose herself because she loved too much. She lost herself because she loved someone who didn't love her back the right way. There's a difference." After they hung up, Maya sat in the darkness of her apartment and made a decision. She'd been running from connection for so long, building walls and calling it strength. But real strength wasn't about protecting yourself from pain. It was about being brave enough to be vulnerable anyway. The next few days were chaos at work. The deal she'd saved started having implementation issues. Her team needed constant direction. There were fires to put out every few hours. But Maya did something different. She delegated. She trusted her team to handle problems without her constant oversight. She left the office at 6 instead of midnight. And when Friday evening came, she was at the school gymnasium when the daddy-daughter dance began. The gym was decorated with streamers and balloons. Little girls in dresses twirled around with their fathers, who looked slightly uncomfortable in suits but happy to be there. Maya stood by the refreshment table, watching. Then she saw them. Sophie wore a purple dress with sparkles. She'd picked it out with her dad in the end, and James had a matching purple tie. He was teaching her to waltz, counting out loud, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, while Sophie stood on his feet and laughed. Maya's heart did something complicated in her chest. This was what love looked like. Not the destructive kind she'd feared all her life. The kind that made you show up. The kind that meant wearing a matching tie and learning to waltz and putting your child's joy ahead of your own comfort. Sophie spotted her and waved frantically. "Ms. Maya, you came." She ran over, dragging James behind her. "I thought you couldn't come." "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Do you like my dress?" "Dad helped me pick it out, but I wished you were there." "It's okay, though, because you're here now." "You look beautiful," Maya said, and meant it. "Do you want to dance with us?" "We're learning the waltz, but Dad keeps messing up." "Hey!" James protested with a laugh. "I'm doing my best here." "I don't really know how to dance," Maya admitted. "That's okay. Neither does Dad, but we're trying anyway, come on." Before Maya could protest, Sophie had grabbed her hand and pulled her onto the dance floor. Other parents smiled at them, this makeshift family of 3. James showed Maya the steps, patient and encouraging, while Sophie bounced between them with joy. And something inside Maya cracked wide open. All the walls she'd built, all the defenses she'd maintained, all the fear she'd carried, it suddenly seemed pointless. This moment, this silly dance in a school gymnasium with a father and daughter who'd somehow found their way into her heart, was more real than any business deal she'd ever closed. When the song ended, Sophie hugged Maya tight. "Thank you for coming. This is the best dance ever." "Thank you for inviting me," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. Later, after Sophie had worn herself out dancing and was sitting with friends eating cookies, James and Maya stepped outside for some air. The night was cool and they could hear the music drifting through the open doors. "I'm sorry I missed dress shopping," Maya said. "I know. Sophie knows too. She was disappointed, but she got over it. Kids are resilient like that. I don't want to be someone who disappoints her." "Then don't be. It's not that simple. My job is demanding. There will be other emergencies, other crises. I can't promise I'll always be available." "I'm not asking you to be perfect," James said. "I'm asking you to show up when you can and be honest when you can't. That's all anyone can do." Maya looked at him. This man who'd somehow seen past her walls, who'd waited patiently while she figured out how to let him in. "I've spent my whole life being afraid of this, of feeling this way about someone, of needing people. And how does it feel? Terrifying. And also," she paused, searching for the right word, "right. It feels right." James smiled, that open, warm smile that had drawn her in from the beginning. "Good. Because Sophie's already planning your birthday party, and I think we're both too far in to back out now." "My birthday isn't for 3 months." "I know." "She's very thorough." Maya laughed, really laughed, and realized she'd been doing that more lately. Laughing, feeling, living instead of just existing. Inside, Sophie was waving at them through the window, pointing at the dance floor. Maya waved back, and in that moment she understood something fundamental. Love wasn't what had destroyed her mother. Fear had done that. The fear of being alone had made her mother cling to someone who wasn't worth it. But the right love, the kind that made you braver, that asked you to show up, that gave as much as it received, that kind of love didn't destroy. It rebuilt, and maybe, just maybe, Maya was ready to be rebuilt. The Monday after the dance, Maya walked into her office and did something she'd never done before. She told her assistant to block out every Friday evening on her calendar indefinitely. "No meetings, no calls, no exceptions. Are you sure?" her assistant asked, surprised. "What if something urgent comes up?" "Then my team can handle it. Or it can wait until Monday. Fridays are for something else now." She didn't explain what that something else was, but word got around the office anyway. The CEO who lived at work was suddenly leaving at reasonable hours. She was smiling more. She seemed lighter somehow, less like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. Her CFO cornered her in the hallway one day. "Are you okay? You're acting different." "I'm better than okay. I'm actually living my life for the first time in years. Because of that teacher and his kid." Maya bristled at his dismissive tone. "His name is James, her name is Sophie. And yes, because of them. They reminded me that there's more to life than quarterly earnings reports." The CFO looked uncomfortable. "I just don't want to see you distracted. You've worked so hard to build this company, and I'm going to keep building it. But I'm also going to have a life outside these walls. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." It was a conversation Maya needed to have with herself as much as with her CFO. For so long, she'd believed that success meant sacrifice, that you couldn't have both ambition and connection, career and family. But watching James balance teaching and parenting, seeing how Sophie thrived despite her challenges, Maya realized that belief was just fear in disguise. The fear that if she let herself want more than work, she'd lose everything. The fear that love would make her weak. The fear that needing people meant giving them the power to destroy her. But James and Sophie had shown her a different truth. Love didn't make you weak. It made you brave enough to keep showing up even when it was hard, even when you failed, even when you were scared. 2 months passed. The technology program at James's school launched successfully, with students using the adaptive software Maya's company had developed. The local news did a story on it, and Maya stood in the background while James and the students took center stage. Watching those kids light up as they accessed lessons in ways that actually worked for them, that felt more satisfying than any profit margin she'd ever hit. Sophie's 8th birthday was coming up, and she'd been planning it for weeks. She wanted a science-themed party with experiments and a volcano cake, and she wanted Maya there, not as a sponsor or a guest, but as family. "You'll come, right?" Sophie asked one Friday evening. They'd started a routine. Maya came over for dinner every Friday, and sometimes Sophie would stay over at Maya's apartment on weekends. It had happened gradually, naturally, until suddenly Maya's life included Sunday morning pancakes and helping with homework, and knowing exactly how Sophie liked her hot chocolate. "Of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it." "Good, because you're important." Such a simple statement, but it made Maya's throat tight. When was the last time someone had told her she was important? Not because of what she could do or what she could provide, but just because she existed in their life. The night before the party, Maya lay awake in bed thinking about how much had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been alone by choice, convinced that isolation was strength. Now her life was tangled up with James and Sophie in ways that should have terrified her, but somehow felt like coming home. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. "Can't sleep either?" She called him instead of texting back. "How did you know I was awake?" "Just a feeling. Big day tomorrow. Sophie's barely slept for a week. She's so excited. She's going to love the party. Maya, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. "What kind of question is that?" "A genuine one. I know these past few months have been a lot. You've made room in your life for us, changed your routines, opened yourself up in ways I know weren't easy. I just want to make sure you don't regret it." Maya thought about her answer carefully. "I spent 15 years building walls and calling it success. I convinced myself I was happy because I'd achieved my professional goals. But James, I was lonely. I was so lonely I'd forgotten what it felt like to not be lonely. And then I met you and Sophie, and suddenly my apartment felt empty when you weren't there. My Fridays felt meaningless if I wasn't having dinner with you. My life had color in it again." She paused. "So yes, I'm happy. Happier than I've ever been." "Good. Because Sophie's planning to ask you something tomorrow, and I wanted to prepare you." "What kind of something?" "The kind where she wants to know if you're going to be her forever person." Maya's heart stopped. "Her what?" "Her forever person. It's her way of asking if you're part of our family permanently. I tried to tell her it was too soon, that we should give you time, but she said she's known since the daddy-daughter dance. She said you looked at us the way people look at their family." "What did you say?" "I said it was up to you. That being a forever person is a big commitment, and she needed to respect whatever you decided."